Hi, I'm Debbie Ingram, and welcome to Under the Dome, sponsored by Town Meeting TV. I'm doing a special series on affordability in Vermont, and we're looking at the topics of taxes, housing costs, and income. Our session today is going to focus on housing costs, and my guest is Alex Farrell. Hi, Alex. Nice to see you.
Hey, Debbie. Good to see you.
Yeah, and Alex is the Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is part of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development in our government. So, again, thanks for coming, and let's just dive right into talking about what's going on at the state level. Now, I know that there are different ways of going about trying to increase the number of units of housing. I think a lot of people will agree that we have kind of a supply and demand problem in Vermont with regard to our housing. So there are two paths you can kind of follow: rehabbing some of our older buildings, because we do have a lot of buildings that need work, and then also constructing new buildings. So can you tell us what some of the resources are that are available to do that and to help landlords to do that?
Sure. Thanks, Debbie. And it's a great point that we do have a lot of underutilized structures here in Vermont, and especially in certain parts of the state. If you drive around Rutland County, for example, you'll see a lot of neighborhoods where you just see underutilized properties. And so when we think about statewide solutions, we try to make sure that we're, as a state, looking at solutions that will work for each part of the state. Sure, here in Chittenden County, you're going to see a lot of new construction. And while we need new construction everywhere in Vermont, we also need to make use of those structures we already have right now. So if you think about the resources in terms of the direct investment that we can make here at the state to give property owners and other sort of landlords a chance to expand, either build new or to rehab, there are a few different sources. So some of the traditional sources that are focused on big A affordable housing, so income restricted and some mixed use. Then you're looking at Vermont Housing and Conservation Board money. They are probably the largest funder of housing, them along with Vermont Housing Finance Agency with their low-income housing tax credits. But for just any landlord out there who's not one of these established nonprofits, but they are a landlord, perhaps they own property that they want to rent out, we have a program, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program. The thinking behind VHIP is exactly what you laid out, that we have units all over the state that are falling into disrepair. We have structures that could be residential units, but they're just underutilized space right now. Or perhaps folks have a large farmhouse or an old Victorian, and they don't need all that space anymore. They'd rather split it up into a duplex or 3 units. VHIP, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, can do all of those things. So it's grants up to $50,000. The landlord, by accepting the grant, does agree to either 5 or 10 years of affordability. So what that means is if you choose a 5-year option, you're agreeing to, at an affordable cost, rehouse somebody who has exited homelessness. Or you can opt for a 10-year agreement, and over the course of that 10 years, you can rent to anybody, but you need to rent at an affordable rate. So you're still serving folks that need that affordable unit, but it's a little bit more flexible and you just have that longer timeline. But then at the end of it, we have a new unit on the market here in Vermont, and it's been incredibly impactful. We've funded over 1,000 units with it, and at a cost to the state of just under $40,000. And so this is really drawing in private investment and getting our landlords to inject some of their capital and then offer affordable units.
Great, okay. And I'm sorry, how much does the state spend on the program altogether?
So it's a little under $40,000 per unit.
Per unit, I see, okay, right.
Yeah.
And these are applications that landlords can apply for. So anybody watching at home, they could just go online and look at your department, right?
They could, yeah.
For the information.
If
Great.
folks come and look at our department, or in different regions of the state, they could work with, in this part of the state, Champlain Housing Trust, could be Rural Edge, Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, Down Street, or I'm forgetting someone. Cornerstone.
Okay, there you go.
Cornerstone,
Right.
there we go.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, no worries. Great. All right. Well, good. That sounds like a great program. And then also, there's been talk recently about the kind of housing that's available for different people in different income groups. And there's this term, the missing middle. So can you talk about what that is and how it's being addressed?
Yeah, sure. So in the space of housing, we think about housing in a few different ways. We think about to whom is the housing affordable, either by vouchers or other subsidy or some income restriction that's placed on it, or housing types that tend to be naturally occurring affordable housing. And when we start thinking about that side of things, we think about design. So there are a few examples that people could probably think of right off the top of their head where maybe because of the design, it's naturally occurring affordable. So manufactured homes is a type of housing unit that people can picture, and there's also certain people may talk about tiny homes, or we used to talk a lot about starter homes. So picture your 700 square foot ranch with 1 or 2 bedrooms. Now, when we talk about missing middle, this is a type of housing that was actually extremely common in Vermont in prior decades, really actually prior centuries. It was very common. If you go through our downtowns and our cities and a lot of our smaller towns in Vermont, right in the core, in the village and the downtowns, you're going to see a lot of this type of housing. So missing middle housing describes a type of housing that can be more efficient to build because it's a little bit more compact, but has become largely made illegal by zoning. So what I want folks to picture is something between detached single-family homes and mid-rise. So between those, you'd see townhomes, duplexes. You might see, we're here in the Old North End, you see a lot of these sort of the 3 stacked. So it's an apartment building with 1, 2, 3 units. These won't necessarily have a big yard. There's not a lot of frontage. And so what you end up with is these vibrant, walkable neighborhoods with sort of a little bit more density, that the homes are all closer to each other, and so you're going to see an opportunity for perhaps there's also retail. So it's this type of housing that can fit in a mixed-use type neighborhood, but is about the same size as single-family homes. So this missing middle design, like I said, because of our zoning, we just haven't seen this for a lot of decades. Now, that's what a lot of our efforts at the state level have been focused on, is what can we do to enable more of that? Because frankly, that is how we can build housing within our small towns, within our downtowns, bring some of that vibrancy back, focus on infill, so rather than building out, building in where we already have the infrastructure, and just maximizing what we already have. That on its own brings some of the costs down.
Yeah, I think this is such an important sort of category of homes, because I think all of us know people who, would really benefit from being able to access that. And when we talk about trying to bring people in for jobs and that sort of thing, that seems like it's just extremely important. So yeah, glad to hear that's going on. So let's move on to tax credits. That's one method that a state can use to try to provide incentives for building or renovating housing. Can you tell us about some of those programs?
Sure. So I'll touch on a few, and one of them is a federal source that's administered here by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. This is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. This is one of the most common funding sources of affordable housing throughout the country, and it's an incredible tool. And effectively what it does is it leverages private capital to invest in affordable housing. I won't get into the mechanics of there's 9% tax credits and 4%. That's not what matters. What matters is it ends up acting as a funding source for affordable housing projects. So it comes with certain requirements. It'll lead to the VHFA working with a developer to make sure that if it's a rental unit, that they're offered at a certain affordable rate. For folks, when we talk about affordable, and we can talk more, but that's generally you're trying to keep your housing costs below 30% of your monthly income. So that's what VHFA will try to get the rents towards. Now, with the low-income housing tax credit, we as a state we don't want to leave those federal dollars on the table. So what we try to do is we try to match other sources. So Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, their dollars will take perhaps funding from community development block grants, which flow through my department. The point is we're going to try to take all of these other dollars and leverage these low-income housing tax credits, because that's federally supported money that we don't want to lose track of. Here in Vermont, we don't use all of our allocated credits every year. So we're really trying to make an effort to double down on our state investments that utilize that. So these tax credits are a huge tool for our nonprofit developers, for any other developers that are up for building affordable housing, which we need a lot of right now. So that's been an incredible tool. So that's a purely housing-focused tax credit. Now there are a couple others that folks here in Vermont leverage for housing in an exciting way. So we have a state-designated downtown and village center program here in Vermont. And this is really all about making sure that our small villages, our downtowns have resources and tools to make Vermont's downtown, its iconic downtowns, its iconic village centers, make them healthy, make them vibrant, make them thriving. And so part of that is the Downtown and Village Center tax credit. Incredibly effective program. What this tax credit is any property owners within the boundaries of these designated downtowns and village centers, they can apply for this tax credit. What's great about this, it's a very flexible source. If you're within that downtown and you want to make improvements to your property, this is a good source for you. So we have seen tons of folks, again, I talk about these conversions from commercial space, especially in our downtowns and village centers that need more housing than commercial space nowadays, converting those spaces into residential. They're improving the accessibility to these units. They might be doing some flood proofing. All of these are key to making sure that we have, in walkable areas, we have housing. So the Downtown and Village Center tax credit has just been a tremendous source for folks within this built environment to add housing. And then, another fun source that I call it fun, but it really, you see some neat projects, is federal historic preservation tax credits. Folks don't usually think of historic preservation and adding housing, but in this case, we've seen some really neat applications of this federal source to preserve a historic building and then change the use to housing. And I'll give you an example. So in Berry City, they years ago consolidated where they had many neighborhood schools, and they changed their structure. So more unified in Berry City with their school systems. And one of those schools, beautiful brick building called the Ward 5 School, an iconic building up on top of a hill in Berry City. And I'm sure folks in Berry City remember it. Many attended the school. Well, this building had been underutilized for years, just frankly sitting there. And while it's beautiful and it's a historic product, it's just not doing as an asset, it's not doing what the city needed. Well, Evernorth and some others just redeveloped that building and utilized these federal historic preservation tax credits to bring housing into that building. So now people who once went to school there can walk in, see their old classrooms now as homes. And what's really neat is the chalkboards remain in the apartments, which is really cool. So those are some of the creative ways that people are adding housing using these different tax credits.
Oh, that's terrific. That's a great story. It's good. Well, I know there are also some other programs and other mechanisms and ideas that the state is using. What else can you tell us about what's available out there?
Yeah. Well, when we think about rebuilding in our downtowns and in our village centers, one of the big hurdles that we face here in Vermont is contaminants, whether it's soil contaminants or we hear a lot about PCBs in buildings or other contaminants that need to be cleaned up. One source that's been utilized to sort of overcome that initial hurdle is brownfields. And so brownfields dollars, there's federal brownfields dollars and there's state brownfields dollars. And we don't need to get into the specifics of the two other than to say the state dollars can be a little bit more flexible than the federal, which is usually the case. We try to match our federal investments with some more flexible state funding. So what these have enabled us to do is to take, say, if there used to be some commercial use on a lot, maybe there was a mechanic there decades ago, but now it's in a residential neighborhood. You look around, there are neighbors on either side of a vacant lot, but that lot's sitting there because you know there's going to be some remediation. You got to clean up that site. Well, these brownfield dollars can come in, help you clean up that site, and now you can go from there and then build up. So you don't have that burden or that risk, frankly, of a contaminated site and residential use there. So that's been a tool that we've tried to provide to folks looking to build housing so that they don't have some of those hurdles. But we're also thinking a lot about what are the other burdens right now for home building, and especially here in Vermont, we're a rural state. We have a lot of municipalities that are rather small. So what that has meant is our municipalities, especially in recent decades, they haven't been able to make the infrastructure investments in the way that maybe they did in the 60s and 70s. So in prior decades, our municipalities had the financial and frankly the human capital to take on projects where they would run infrastructure in and they would put in roads, knowing that a development would be coming and the town would benefit from those new homes, the grand list value and all that. We don't have municipalities that can really take on that burden right now. They're tapped financially. A lot of our municipalities don't have the staff to sort out that burden. So what ends up happening is the home building is what ends up taking on the burden of paying for all that infrastructure. And when I say the home building, it's because it's us that takes on the burden. When we go and we rent an apartment in that new development, or we go buy a home in that new development, the costs are going to be higher because not only do they have to factor in the cost to build that individual home, the developer's factoring in the cost to run all the road, the water, the wastewater, the sidewalks, all of that is falling on the home. So we're thinking a lot about what tools can we provide that can help cover that cost, or at least finance that cost. One tool that is used is TIF, tax increment financing. Again, a very wonky tool, but that's something that's available to our larger cities. Burlington has a TIF, Winooski, a really successful TIF. So it's been an effective tool, but not all of Vermont has the ability to leverage that. So we are looking, the state and legislators are constantly looking at new tools to, if not fund, at least fund or finance that investment. And we're really fortunate that both the administration and the legislature really have a focus on this right now. And so there's a lot of discussion around new tools there that could be coming to bear, because we want small towns like Roxbury, Fairhaven, Grand Isle to be able to benefit from financing tools to make infrastructure investments, not just our larger downtowns and cities. So really exciting opportunities there to help cover the infrastructure costs.
Great, okay. And just sort of following along that same sort of pathway, are there other like regulations at the state level or ordinances at the municipal level that you think are coming down the pipeline in the future that will help with housing?
I do, and a lot of it's being discussed this legislative session, and it's an exciting time in housing in Vermont, because really dating back several sessions now, some notable legislation that passed was the Home Act back in 2023, Act 181 of this past year, and now sort of the logical continuation of all of those conversations are happening right now. And so what's coming is likely to be some more clarifications of the Home Act. And just for folks watching at home, the Home Act was Act 47 of 2023. And really that was the state stepping in and trying to provide some uniformity to zoning across municipalities. I set this stage because there's likely to be some more of that going forward. In Vermont, you've got 250-something municipalities, all with different zoning, some with no zoning, some with very restrictive zoning. So as a builder, it's really complicated to navigate. You need to know for each municipality what you're navigating, and zoning can be very restrictive, can reduce the number of units you can build. Let's say a municipality says you need to have 4 parking spaces per unit of housing. Well, that's going to make it really hard to build even a 4 or 5 unit multifamily home. So that's what the Home Act took a look at. What are ways that we can set certain standards, certain density standards, parking standards, so that municipalities, especially municipalities with water and wastewater, aren't being too restrictive. In Act 181 last year, we saw a similar line of thinking. What can we do with our regulations, but looking at the state level? What can we do with state permitting? Really focused on Act 250, which is the state's land use law, which triggers regulatory review of projects of a certain size. We looked at ways to carve out exemption areas. So, for example, where we're sitting here in Burlington, there's already robust zoning. This is already a built environment. We definitely don't need another layer of state review. And really everyone agreed with that. And so that's what Act 181 achieved, is it took certain areas of the state still being drawn, and it just says, look, these folks have already done the planning and zoning. So there's not going to be Act 250 review for housing in these areas. So that sets us up for what's to come. Well, this year, there's been a big focus, and I'm really grateful to legislators for having this focus on the appeals structure. So when we think about home building and what are the hurdles, what are the factors that go into whether or not folks will build housing? Well, a developer is going to look at the cost, the time, and the risk. And when I say risk, I mean unpredictability. Well, we know cost sometimes is largely out of our control. Time, there's a lot of permitting and regulations that play into the time. So we've certainly taken a look at that, and we're going to keep taking a look at that. But the risk, there's a lot of risk in appeals, especially here in Vermont. We have really prioritized the right to appeal a project to such an extent that it's far out of balance. When I talk to my colleagues in other jurisdictions, other states, cities and towns in other parts of the country, they're really surprised at the robust right to appeal here in Vermont. And while that can sound good, what it ends up doing is it has the effect of preventing housing from being built. It might cause someone to reduce the number of housing units being built, or it might, at the very least, delay a project. So down in Putney, there is an affordable housing project being built on Alice Hallway Drive. It saw several appeals, 3 of which went to the Vermont Supreme Court. A 4th appeal from these same folks was just turned away by the Supreme Court. And so the project was able to move forward, but here's the cost, is in the meantime, the literal cost of the project increased by over $1 million. All those have to be now borne by the development. And so state investment that happened since to make the project pencil out, any other further investment from equity partners, that was not going to building units. That was now just covering the costs of increased prices of materials while they were waiting to resolve these appeals, the appeals themselves. So when we talk about, fixing this appeal system, it's not about taking away anyone's rights. Really, it's about rebalancing so that we're placing a higher priority on housing and making sure that those can move forward. So folks should expect to see some reforms in the appeal space. It looks like there's some likely this year, and then I assume the conversation will continue. But we're also going to build on some of the work from past sessions. So like I said, you're going to continue to hear more about some of the clarifications of the Home Act. So again, as municipalities, we've asked a lot of municipalities over these past few years, and as they try to adjust and adapt to this new framework under the Home Act, because they know they need to be in accordance with these state standards, there's always a little bit of nuance. As you know from your time in the Senate, the legislative bodies can say one thing and feel like their intent is very clear, but statutory language is complicated, and different attorneys could have different interpretations of that language. So there's going to need to be some clarifications, and we'll see some of that. And it's really going to lean towards clear definitions that enable more housing. So that's an ongoing project. And you're also going to see us talking a lot about what other types of permitting at the state level could maybe be streamlined. a bit. Still effective, but just streamlined, wetlands, etc. But you're also going to hear us talking about adding tools to the tool belt. So future sessions, maybe not this session, but there's a lot of discussion around how can we get creative here in Vermont. And in the housing space nationally, a lot of folks are turning again towards what's broadly called off-site construction. So that could include things like modular. Folks around here might know Huntington Homes or other off-site builders. It could be manufactured homes. Folks could think of what we traditionally called mobile home parks. Those are manufactured homes. Or it could be panelized. These are all different types of building a home, just not on site, building in a factory somewhere. And there may be, in sort of a labor-constrained environment, there may be a big role for this to play. Could it speed up home building? Could we build more homes with fewer workers, knowing we just don't have the workers? So there's a lot of opportunities there. Other tools could be a land bank. A land bank could help us reutilize these underutilized or vacant structures. So there's a lot to look at, not just in improving our existing systems, because there's a lot we have to do there, but we also need to just make sure we're thinking about what new tools could we be introducing to help home building across the state.
Well, that is exciting. There's a lot going on, and I really appreciate your work on all that and the legislature. And it's great to see the administration and the legislature working together so well, too. And yeah, thank you so much for all this valuable information. And I want to end, as I do with all my guests, by asking you, we use this term affordability, but how should it be defined? What is your definition of affordability?
Yeah, I love this question. Because there, in the housing space anyway, there's a textbook answer, and the textbook answer is 30%. Are you spending less than 30% of your housing costs, or of your income on your housing costs? That's your rent or your mortgage, property taxes if that applies to you, utilities, insurance. Does that all add up to less than 30% of your income? Now, while that is a good, useful rule of thumb, I also just think more broadly about, okay, so affordability in the housing space. And what we're trying to do is enable people in the long term to prosper. And just keeping their monthly costs under 30% isn't necessarily, it might be a good tool for them, but it isn't necessarily everything they need. We want to give people the opportunity to really prosper. If that means that giving more opportunities for Vermonters to be homeowners, and we know, for example, we have just terrible rates of very poor rates of homeownership in BIPOC communities here in Vermont. It is really a place where we have a lot of work to do. But even as a state, we have parts of the state where we do have really high percentage of homeownership, which is great. Other parts where it's not so high. So, when I think about affordability, yes, let's keep folks' costs down. Let's also give them the opportunities. So it's a big picture, but it's, we're chipping away at it.
Great, yes. Well, excellent answer, and thanks for your point of view. And thank you all for watching, and we hope that you tune into some of our other additional episodes. But it's been great to talk about housing costs with Alex Farrell. I'm Debbie Ingram. Thank you.